I'll call this meeting to order. It's the regularly scheduled meeting of the Transportation Public Works Committee this day, June 20th, 2017. I'm Councilmember Reich. I'll be chairing today's committee, and I'm joined by my colleagues, Councilmembers Yang, Glidden, Palmisano, and Bender. We are quorum, and we'll proceed with today's agenda, which we have 17 items. One is for discussion. The remainder consent. Any committee member can pull a consent item for further consideration at their will. We will go through the items, but before I do, I want to give a little shout out. We have with us today the department's, some of the department's urban scholars. If you guys want to give a little wave, thanks for being here. Shadowing today, I understand. So moving down the line, we have item 1 on consent. It's agreement with the Metropolitan Council for 5th Street Light Rail Corridor signal improvements. Item 2 is the agreement with the Minnesota Department of Transportation for traffic signal design services associated with the I-35W Transit Access Project. Item 3 is the agreement with the Minnesota Department of Transportation for the same project, and that is an agreement authorizing the department and MnDOT for related construction of that project, including the cost of participation by the city and the project elements requested by the city in the estimated amount of $4,600,000 plus. Item 4 is the agreement with the EMA Incorporated for project management support services for the advanced meter infrastructure project. Item 5 is a contract amendment with Fitzgerald Excavating and Trucking Incorporated for stormwater pond dredging and cleanout project. Item 6 is the subordinate funding agreement with the Met Council for Southwest LRT Transit Project. Item 7 is the snow and ice removal from public sidewalk assessments and setting that public hearing, and that public hearing will be July 25th, 2017. Item 8 is the Essex Street Southeast Sanitary Sewer Project designation, cost estimate, appropriation increase, and setting the public hearing. That public hearing will be set also for July 25th, 2017. Item 9 is the Pedestrian Advisory Committee appointments. We have a series of appointments there listed. We do want to note one modification for that, and that is the Joseph Klein, seat 4, will be actually Rachel Bell, seat 4 from Ward 9. Moving down, we have, and then there's a series of actions related to that action. And then item 10 is combining the 2017 and 2018 Parkway Paving Program. Item 11 is the Organics Recycling Public Service Announcement Production and Placement Services, a request for proposals. Item 12 is the ESPN X Games 2017 Large Block Event Permit. Item 13 is the Hennepin South Street Reconstruction Project variance request for layout approval. And that area is from Lake Street to 36th Avenue. Item 14 is the bid for crane carrier OEM parts and services. Item 15 is the bid for concrete pavement rehabilitation. That's a low bid acceptance. And then 16 is also a low bid acceptance for installation of large diameter cured in pipe. Does anyone wish to pull any of these items? Councilmember Bender.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to make a brief comment on item 13.
Please do.
Thank you. This is a reconstruction project of Hennepin Avenue from Lake Street to 36th. And this is a project that got moved up 1 year in our capital program because of the investment that we made as a council in our street reconstruction and repair. And so staff, I just wanted to note, staff did a really amazing job of doing a complex project with a lot of community engagement in a very short period of time, and I appreciate it very much, and I know my constituents do as well. I just wanted to briefly comment, just because there has been so much community engagement about this, kind of where we landed, and I don't think it really needs a full presentation, but that is available on the website for any council members or constituents who want to see it. This is a roadway. It's about 6 blocks through Uptown. A lot of demand on this part of the street corridor, right? And so with a full reconstruction, we use the approach of our complete streets policy to look at how we can improve the street for the 50 years that it's expected to be in the new configuration, in the new design. And we were able to provide, with staff's recommendation, wider and more inviting sidewalks. There was a lot of interest in safer pedestrian crossings and improved transit service, and that's reflected in staff's recommendation. There was a lot of big ideas about how to reimagine that first block between Lake and 31st. And I know some of my constituents are disappointed that we weren't able to eliminate the curbs and make more of a plaza or a shared street there. But the traffic volumes and bus volumes are just very high in that part of the street. And so staff came forward with a different approach, which is a large raised crosswalk in the middle to accommodate the hundreds of people that are crossing in the middle of the street there at the mid-block on the street, with a lot of little commercial destinations as well as Calhoun Square, and much wider sidewalks on this portion of the street. We're able to add greenery and trees to the portion between 31st and 36th, which is a very residential part of the street, so that will be a huge amenity for the folks who live along this corridor, and as well as the commercial uses. And then finally, this is on our bike master plan map. And although I personally told staff at the beginning that I thought we should really focus and prioritize the pedestrian and transit accommodations on this corridor, the community input and staff's recommendation include a bike lane. And I have become convinced, because of the good work of staff, that that this is really a critical connection, that any of the alternative options that we might have on side streets just don't meet the goals of having a direct bicycle connection and a connection for people traveling on bicycle to all of the residential and commercial destinations here. And then finally, there was interest in retaining as much on-street parking as possible, and this design does that with some trade-offs. There is some parking removal, but not the full parking removal that would have been required for a curb-separated bike lane. And so I do also have some constituents that are disappointed that this bike lane is on street and not on the curb. So anyway, those are a lot of the details. Again, just kind of speaking to my constituents, hundreds of whom have been really involved in this design process, in 3 public meetings, in probably about a dozen neighborhood meeting and discussions, and a lot of one-on-one meetings and talks with staff, again, which I appreciate so much. And then just finally to say that the presentation and a few frequently asked questions set will be on the project website in a couple of days. The presentation is there now, and staff is working on answers to the questions that have been coming up a lot. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Well, thank you. A lot goes into these projects. So, well done. Any other commentary on that item or any other consent item? Seeing none, I'll move all items, noting the adjustment to item 9. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Dissenting nay. That carries. We can now go to the final item on our agenda, which is item 17, and it's a discussion item. Good morning, Director Hutchinson.
Good morning, Mr. Chair and committee members. As you know, the Complete Streets ordinance was adopted last year, and with that came a staff direction to continue to research a variety of options that would help us do our work. We are back today. Kathleen Mayell, a supervising transportation planner in transportation planning and programming, has been diligently working on these items for the last year or so, and today we're providing an update to you on that staff direction.
Thank you. Good morning.
Good morning, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. As Robin noted, I'm Kathleen Mayall. I'm a supervisor, transportation planner, and Public Works Division of Transportation Planning and Programming. And I'm pleased to be here to talk about the work that really the whole department has done around Complete Streets and since its passage last May. So it's been just over a year, and excited to share some of the highlights of our work to date since then. I'm going to quickly go over some of the highlights of the policy and the staff direction, talk about some improvements that have already been made, some new tools and processes, studies that are currently underway, and then some ongoing and planned work looking forward. Big picture, 2 major components of the policy is that it creates a modal hierarchy, placing pedestrians at the top, followed by bicyclists and those taking transit, and then the traveling public and motor vehicles. And implementation is seen to be through a really unified platform of programming, planning, design, construction, operation, and maintenance activities. The staff direction that accompanied the passage of the policy included a request to report back at this time on the implementation of the policy and what progress has been made to date. To start with, some of the things that have happened, this came through council a couple cycles ago. We have changed our parallel line crosswalks at all of our signalized intersections, or we are in the process of doing that this season, to our Minneapolis zebra crosswalks. This provides significant visibility improvements for at all of our signalized intersections for where the pedestrians are crossing, and then the solid stop bar as well being placed back a bit further to allow greater room for pedestrians to cross. We have reduced the amount of time to get our non-compliant sidewalks cleared in the winter by eliminating one of the initial inspections, physical inspections that our inspectors would have to go out on site after a complaint was registered through our 311 system. So this in effect has reduced the amount of time to establish a work order on non-compliant sidewalks by about 2 to 3 days. There are 2 new proposed capital programs in our 2018 to 2022 CIP that really come out of this policy as well. The 2 are the Pedestrian Safety Program, and this program is aimed to improve street crossings at unsignalized intersections by different geometric or curb work that would support easier crossing for pedestrians. There can be potentially mid-block iterations of this as well. That's the primary focus. And additionally, a sidewalk gap program. And this program looks to fill some of the gaps that exist around our sidewalk network throughout the city. The rendering at the bottom shows a stretch of Chicago between 44th and 46th South, a potential candidate in our sidewalk gap program. Additionally, there have been a number of street layouts that have come through council, and one of them we just talked about. And Lisa, Councilmember Bender, really highlighted a lot of the things I wanted to highlight on this slide. The additional pedestrian space, bicycle lanes, the transit priority that's given here with a lot of in-lane stopping for easier boarding of transit passengers, the creation of boulevard and bump outs, a mid-block crossing in that block between Lake and 31st, and the narrowing of travel lanes. All of these improvements really speak toward the power of the Complete Streets policy and how we can see this in our physical landscape. Another example is 8th Avenue South downtown, where we see additional pedestrian space, lane reduction, narrowing of travel lanes, bump outs, significant expansion of our street trees and landscaping, and getting our transit stops ready for future BRT or bus rapid transit stations along this corridor. Samotar Crossing is a very important non-motorized connection between 11th Avenue South and 15th Avenue South, connecting the Cedar Riverside and Elliott Park and Downtown East neighborhoods. There's planned to be an improved crossing at 15th near the light rail station, improved biking and walking connections on 5th, lighting improvements, and additional streetscaping opportunities. And then finally, one last example, 42nd Avenue North, where we see the inclusion of many bump outs, filling a bikeway gap and creating a more consistent corridor in this section, filling of a sidewalk gap, narrowing of travel lanes, shortening the crossing distance, and the inclusion of boulevards and trees. The past year has also seen the creation of our 20-year streets funding plan, and the methodology in terms of how projects are scored really reflects the Complete Streets policy. In particular, you can see this in our reflected in our modal needs criteria, where the point allocation reflects the Complete Streets policy. There's also, we now include our Complete Streets checklist as an attachment in all of our RCAs for layout approvals. This is an example of the 2628th protected bikeway. And that really details the surrounding context and why decisions are being made as such presented in the layout, and really gives a lot of that background and is able to share that information with the public and those interested stakeholders who want to learn more about how and why these decisions are being made. Similarly, this checklist in the RCA includes now the BAC and PAC resolutions as an attachment, and that really is able to highlight the work that those committees do and reflect their either concerns or support or desires related to that project. And I'll also note the PAC and BAC websites have been reformatted and are much easier to find resolutions. So that also is another way to highlight that work and incorporate and make more transparent the work of those committees in relationship to the different layouts and projects moving forward. We're also looking in 2018 to improve our protected bicycle network through a series of pilots looking to increase the protection offered from a paint and bollard solution to things such as an example here of a curb separation. So in 2018, looking to do a couple different treatments on some existing protected bikeways, evaluate those, see how those work, and move forward with potentially a couple new different treatments. There are a number of studies we currently have underway. The first being our Minneapolis Pedestrian and Biking Winter Maintenance Study. This is nearing conclusion and really looking at what existing practices are in Minneapolis, what other cities around the country and in Canada are doing to really make walking and biking an option year-round, and then presenting potential recommendations for the city to take up. We've also been partnering with the Minneapolis Public Schools on their Safe Routes to School Strategic Action Plan and looking at ways to integrate more fully how we do our planning work around Safe Routes to School and our capital project implementation. We've also been working on citywide stormwater quantity and quality models that will be ready for use in early 2018. These models look to quantify flood risks and prioritize our mitigation work around flooding. They identify areas to minimize pollutant discharges to our water bodies, and really with the goal of informing investments in stormwater management practices for future complete streets projects, and where we can do additional stormwater management practices to reduce flooding and improve water quality in conjunction with our street reconstructions, or potentially independently as well. There's a number of items that are ongoing. So the implementation of our 20-year streets funding plan and the additional projects we were able to accomplish as a city because of the way that criteria reflects the complete streets policy. Really, that whole body of work is reflecting our complete streets policy. Similarly, we're looking to support and highlight even further the potential of our complete streets policy through the comp plan update and the transportation related policies and action items that will be a part of that process. So we've been working closely with CPED on that effort. We have our eye toward our access update, which is on the near-term horizon, with work beginning hopefully in 2018 on that. And really looking, there are so many opportunities that present themselves within public works all the time. And so really looking to create and seize those opportunities to further the goals of the complete streets policy. We've got our staff is out at every open streets this summer, collecting feedback on our 20-year streets funding plan and our prioritization and how we can better integrate what the public is hoping to see and their concerns and desires into our planning framework. And really, we see all of our work kind of building on that document and our complete streets policy. So integrating all of that. This picture on the left is we have t-shirts that our staff are wearing, and this is the image there, that t-shirt. And finally, we have a number of planned work products that we are in different stages of development. And for all of these, I'll go through them, but we're really looking to identify kind of where the city's at right now, what are national best practices and guidelines from either national guidelines or best practices from other cities around the country, and then how do we create a platform that we can take up as a policy item in Access Minneapolis or another venue to make decisions on these items. So for example, traffic signal operations, we're looking at our past initiatives, what are our plans moving forward from both a signal infrastructure and operating scheme. So that work's currently underway. In terms of multimodal level of service, we are beginning work on seeing what's right for Minneapolis, investigating what other cities are doing, what that guidance is. Are there other tools that get us to the same outcomes of multimodal level of service that maybe work better for the city, with the goal of improving pedestrian and bicyclist travel through intersection. Similarly, curbside uses, kind of the same framework. What is our current policy structure, best practices internally? What are others doing? How can we create a solid, transparent foundation for that work and those decisions as it comes to complete streets policy? Detour management, we are currently reviewing city processes and procedures used to detour the traveling public to alternate routes and determining if any updates are needed or desired. In terms of greenways, we're conducting an internal study of looking at all the different neighborhood initiatives, what different status those different initiatives are at. Again, what are national best practices? What's the definition of a greenway? How do we want to define that moving forward? In terms of shared use streets, there's two pieces here. One is looking at an evaluation of our first shared street on West 29th, seeing how that space is being used. Is it meeting the goals that were initially laid out in that project development? And kind of supporting that work, again, what is that national guidance, and creating a white paper on shared use streets and how we want to frame up that concept for our next iteration of the access update. And then two other items here. We are partnering with a series of partners, the People for Bikes, Bennett Midland, which is a private firm, in Portland State University, on a street improvement project. This is really looking to see, modeled after a New York City study done in 2012, what are the economic impacts on the surrounding businesses when you do some projects that alter the use of the right-of-way to either have more space allocated to walking and biking. So we are one of 8 cities that are partnering with this project, and we'll be excited to get the results of that study later. And then building off of that, or I guess parallel to that, we are also doing work to more fully evaluate our projects, not just from an economic standpoint, but from a, speed studies and the number of users using different streets pre and post changes to the right-of-way and how space is allocated. Happy to stand for questions or bring up any of my colleagues who potentially might be better able to answer some questions more specific to their pieces of work.
Any questions for the staff presentation? Questions? Seeing none. Well, thank you for the work and the great update. We, of course, were very proud of the work that we created in terms of the guiding policy. It's well crafted and very well respected, I think, not just here, but also in other cities. But the proof is in the pudding, and just to see how it's already being implemented, how it's already having a very direct influence on the shape of our lived environment and how we move around is, I think that's the best proof of the standing of our plan. I believe we have some other commentary. I'll start with Bender and go to Council Vice President Glidden.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Sorry about that. I wasn't quite ready. I just wanted to say, I think I have seen in a relatively short time the ways that you've highlighted this policy directing the work of the department, and I think it's really powerful to see how a 4-page policy document and the strong statement of policy has come to life in all of these different ways. And I think one area where we hear a lot of need for further work is on our pedestrian safety policies and implementation procedures. So I just wondered if you could talk more about where you see that going in the future. I know you have a couple examples of the new crosswalk standard, the winter snow clearance. I know there's interest from the Pedestrian Advisory Committee in looking at signal timing for pedestrians, and our curb ramp reconstruction policies, looking at ways we could potentially integrate our ADA-related policy work, compliance work with other pedestrian kinds of improvements. And again, I would just want to say, I know you've done an extraordinary amount of work with the policy to date, and I just wondered, that feels like a piece of the work that needs to continue growing in the future.
Sure. To address a couple of those points, Councilmember Bender and Mr. Chair, the signal operations piece in terms of pedestrian timing is part of our overall looking at our traffic signals. So that work our Traffic and Parking Services Division is looking at. In terms of the mention of the ADA ramps, I forgot to put into the presentation, a planned work is also updating our ADA transition plan. So thank you for pointing that out. I am remiss that I did not put that in there. but we are looking to start that update in 2017 and really looking holistically at not just our ramps, but what is it that makes a city accessible for those who are traveling by all sorts of different means. And so that's an important part. We are consistently interacting with our transportation management and repair group on our ADA ramp replacement program and making improvements in those processes and really integrating the planning work that we're doing with them. And so that's an ongoing conversation and effort that we are working on. But I'm certainly looking forward to the ADA transition plan update.
I guess I'll just finally say that, I know you're balancing the workload of getting these projects out the door as we've given you a lot more projects to try to get done. And I just appreciate, again, the way that you've been able to also do these sort of policy changes and these system-wide implementations that are that are really bringing the Complete Streets policy to life and making our streets safer. So thanks again for all the great work.
No, and I think it's very appropriate given the location of pedestrians in our hierarchy that we really do highlight, no pun intended, the next steps of our program. Council Vice President Glidden.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. I have staff direction here that's really, I think, a add-on to a little piece of the work that's encompassed in the Complete Streets policy. I'm trying to remember, I think it was last year when Ms. Kessler had given a greening presentation. I, at that time, had asked some questions about boulevard space as part of our greening network and trying to understand what we understood about that boulevard space citywide, and did some follow-up with staff. And so that is really, in my mind, a little bit of the genesis of this staff direction, although the staff direction is really broader than just boulevard space. And just to kind of say a piece about the boulevard and why I'm interested in it, it really, for communities, this is a significant piece of kind of how you view the space around you is the boulevard, and protects, of course, the pedestrians, and so in some ways adds to the sidewalk space by giving a little bit of breathing room. It is, of course, important to our storm water work, and of course also is the home space to building our tree canopy, depending on the breadth of the boulevard space that's there. And I'm curious, and we don't really have data to answer these questions about, are there issues of equity in terms of what spaces around the city have boulevards and which do not, or which have broad boulevards and which do not, and other things like that. And then because this is important space, how might this data, once we get it, and findings that we might make about that data, help influence the various decisions that we're making, including continuing our development of criteria for the 20-year street funding plan, continuing to evolve what is encompassed in the Complete Streets policy, and I'm sure many other things as well. So the staff direction says this: green space in the right-of-way and in public spaces is an important component of the Complete Streets policy and can contribute to sustainable stormwater management practices. The City Council directs that the Public Works Department evaluate its current data and data from other sources within the city and the Park and Recreation Board to determine additional data needs and methodologies to evaluate and map green space in the public right-of-way or on publicly owned land, and this step shall occur in 2018. Developed based on data needs, budget, and other resource requests to allow full evaluation of green space in the public right-of-way or on publicly owned land, and then utilize data mapping tools to influence resource and policy decisions to ensure equitable development and maintenance of green space in the public right-of-way or on publicly owned land. This includes incorporating findings from such data into criteria for prioritizing projects as part of the 20-year street funding plan, and incorporating findings from data into the Complete Streets policy. So I'd like to go ahead and move this staff direction And I will just say thank you to staff for helping create the language for this and making sure it was something that kind of reflected what would be a best practice by Public Works, which is first kind of taking a look at what do we have and then what do we need, and then making determinations after you have a good look at a robust set of data.
Well, Councilmember Bender.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm really supportive of this and happy to see it coming forward. I wondered if we could just have a really brief update on how this interacts with the mapping and modeling work that I understand is happening with stormwater management, and I just want to make sure that that's still progressing. We have the resources to do that mapping and data portion, and this is a little different, so I just want to acknowledge that this is really more focused on the greenery part, and that's, I think, more focused on the stormwater piece, but just how they fit together. And the resource question, I think, is the important one.
Good morning. Yeah, that's an excellent question, Councilmember Member and members. We are working with the Transportation Planning Group and the rest of Public Works as we develop the models. So we're developing a water quality model that looks at what's coming out of all the stormwater pipes, and the water quantity model that looks at what size are the pipes, where are the restrictions, and what might be necessary to reduce risks related to flooding. And all of that is happening in concert with our televising and understanding the condition and risks associated with the age of the infrastructure. So I see this layer as like another line of evidence that we can use as a division to think about where we invest going forward, where we have space to do work related to greening above the ground, whether it's aesthetics or trees, or greening below the ground to mitigate some of our pollutant discharge or flood risks.
And we're still moving eventually toward having a type of system plan around stormwater management that includes right-of-way options as part of a toolkit. Is that right?
Correct. Yeah. Excellent clarification. So yes, the models that Kathleen highlighted in her presentation are underway, and we expect them to be ready for use in 2018. And at that point, we will develop a checklist or a toolkit so we know when street layouts come up or project opportunities present themselves, we can look at, is this a good place to do pollutant minimization? Is this a place where we need to work on flooding? Is this an area that is necessary or right for infrastructure investment because of age or condition? And then is there the space, and how does that work with all of the other considerations of complete streets to make sure that we're investing along the policies and the directions that you have set?
Okay. Thank you. I think that's really helpful clarification. And I just want to say I think this is a great addition to that work, and so I'm very supportive of the staff direction.
Yeah, I really appreciate the staff direction as well. And two parts of it in particular, it's truly a data-driven statement. As a matter of fact, I think the word data is every other sentence. So it's definitely got that there, and I think that's important because we have a data-driven department, and I think that's how we move forward. But I think this also, more importantly, highlights something that I think that needs to be embedded in every aspect of our plans and policies. It's the equity lens. And so even though we have it broadly, it's always nice to drill it down in specific areas as well. For different work divisions, don't always necessarily have the broad in front of them, the broad directive. They probably are aware of it, but how does it relate to the particular effort is where the rubber really hits the road on some of this stuff. And so thank you, Councilmember Glidden, for drafting this in that manner. We do have it before us. Any further discussion? All in favor of the staff direction as drafted, say aye. Aye. Dissenting nay, that carries. Any further discussion on our presentation? I will move to receive and file. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Dissenting nay, that carries, and we are adjourned.